So the ADAURA study is a trial that was presented in the plenary session at ASCO, and I had the privilege of being the discussant for that. It was presented by Dr. Roy Herbst. It's the adjuvant, phase 3 adjuvant trial of osimertinib in patients with early stage resectable non-small cell lung cancer. And so the results were pretty impressive. The trial was looking at patients who had stage 1B, 2, or 3 lung cancer that was resected for a cure, and patients could have received adjuvant platinum-based chemotherapy or not. And then all patients, of course, had EGFR mutated lung cancer, so they had sensitizing mutations. And the randomization was to osimertinib for 3 years or placebo. And so this trial was designed to look at a pretty common endpoint for these adjuvant trials, something called disease-free survival, and actually disease-free survival in just the group of patients with perhaps higher risk disease that receives chemotherapy, usually so our stage 2 and 3A patients. The study met its primary endpoint. There was a substantial advantage, nearly an 85% reduction in the risk of recurrence or death for those on osimertinib. So in the drug, no new safety signals for what we know about osimertinib, a drug that's routinely used in stage 4 first-line disease now. So not the easiest drug, still has things like diarrhea and skin issues, dry skin, paronychia, but a tolerable drug, and you can adjust the medication. So I was a discussant, and so I think maybe to wrap that up in a nice, neat way, I think the study had a lot of strengths. I think it used, a drug that we're all thinking is the best EGFR targeted drug right now, which is osimertinib. It had a placebo randomized design, a clear primary endpoint. A bit odd, there was a group of patients who may not have received chemotherapy, but even when you look at the group, the subsets by those who received chemo or not, the advantage is consistent for osimertinib. And I think the limitations or weaknesses of this trial are the following. Patients were all unblinded early by the data monitoring committee because of the results being so substantial in favor of OC in the primary endpoint. And so the follow-up is limited. And things like overall survival, which ultimately we need to move the needle to demonstrate that this therapy actually improves survival, we won't get from this analysis and probably even later, just because now patients have been unblinded, and that'll affect the outcomes for these patients that are currently on trial. And so the ultimate argument, or I should say controversy for a trial like this is not whether osimertinib benefits patients. That seems to be pretty clear. But is that benefit that you get while you're on osimertinib sustained when you're off it? And in other words, once you come off the medication, is there value that you could still receive from osimertinib later, if for the placebo group, for example, or just because you're on it for 3 years, is there an advantage that then is sustained and maintained in the form of keeping disease away and ultimately for survival? And so does this change the way we should think about using osimertinib in early stage disease? Does it change how we test patients for EGFR mutations? In my view, based on the data, even with all the questions that we have, what we don't have in terms of survival and limited follow-up, and the unknowns about what happens when you come off osimertinib, I think this is a new standard. I think you should test patients for EGFR mutations with early stage disease. That's going to be controversial. This is an expensive medication. It does have side effects, and we don't have survival data. But that'll be the subject of a lot of discussion and debate perhaps over the next several months. But we're waiting on the publication. I think there'll be a chance to dive deeper into the data, get some of these other questions we all have solved, hopefully. And then, as with any trial, it takes time for these results to kind of marinate a little bit and us to discuss and think through. But for me right now, I think that's change care.